So Absolute Superman totally loses it, and I know it's been said before, but this time it's going completely off the rails, especially when you see what happens here in the very end. So what happens here is that we open up on Krypton, or at least a twisted version of it here, and a voice declares this: "For the crime of ambition, we find the L's guilty. For the crime of third-degree descent, we find the L's guilty." And that's when we jump here to inside a courtroom where we see Jor-El and we see Lara, who are currently strapped down here with restraints. And the voice continues on by saying, "For the crime of illegal use of science, we find the L's guilty." And that's in the moment here where Kal-El screams out and is like, "Stop it, you're killing them." And then the sentence that follows here is absolutely brutal, because it says, "Jor-El and Lara-El have been found guilty by a simulated jury of their peers, and they are hereby sentenced to hang from the skies above Kandor for 100 years. But the judges, they weren't finished there. They turn over to Kal-El and they're like, "For the misdemeanor of offense of being an orphan," which is absolutely wild, "the Science League hereby sentences you to 20 years confinement in the Phantom Zone orphanage." So as they're dragging Kal-El away here, he's fighting back and he's shouting, he's like, "Krypton is going to die. My parents were trying to save everyone." To which the response to that is then blasphemy. Add another 5 years to his sentence. So Kal-El is pissed off at this point, and his eyes begin to glow red with tears in his eyes as well as he screams, "To hell with you." And suddenly in that moment, he just basically goes off and completely destroys everyone around him. But then we hard cut because we go back here to the Greenland, Lazarus's research facility here, where we see the words of Project Son of the Demon Day 1. So as you've already guessed, right, that wasn't really what happened on Krypton. We already know this already if you've been following the Absolute series here. But what's currently happening right now is that Brainiac has Superman strapped down to his nightmarish machine right now, holding him down with kryptonite constraints, and it's completely tearing his mind apart. And we see Ras Al Ghul here and Talia, who are watching from below here as Brainiac oversees the process. Now, Brainiac mentions here how Superman has just mentally murdered the entire ruling class of his home planet for the 575th time in 6 hours. And he mentions how once they've reached 3,000 that he'll be ready for the earthly phase of his rebirth. But the thing is here is that Ras Al Ghul expects better results than that, especially with what he deems as the failed experiment here of Christopher Smith. Now, if you're unfamiliar here, Chris Smith was the original Peacemaker in the DC Comics, and here in the Absolute Universe, he's one of the Peacemakers, or I should say he's one of the generals here of the Peacemakers. And what happens here previously is that he ends up killing innocent civilians, and that led here to a riot. And then Lazarus ends up hanging those people that were rioting. So this whole thing is an absolute, pun intended, dark, disgusting mess. So then Ras Al Ghul, he continues on and he's like, "I want Superman intact. I want him not reduced to some lobotomized clone." To which Brainiac assures him that yes, the son of the demon shall rise. So then Ras, like, he steps forward here and it's kind of like caressing Superman. He's like, "All you have to do is make the boy see the truth. If Superman wishes to save the world, its path to salvation lies through Ras Al Ghul." Now, back in the lab here, the Brainiac hives, they discuss pretty much Superman's torture here. And Brainiac mentions, he's like, "He will break. I know he will. No mind can withstand this level of torture. His protector, Soul, has been neutralized. His powers weakened by sunlight deprivation and the radiation of the obliterated homeworld." But then another one of the Brainiacs here, they step in. They're like, "In regard to the Kryptonian meteorite you so ingeniously synthesized, some of us thought perhaps kryptonite might be a more efficient name for the substance." So then this pretty much basically just pisses off Brainiac, and he's like, "One demerit for speaking out of turn, Brainiac 9. Return your tongue to the parts department." And then this dude just starts like cutting off his tongue. I'm like, man, yo, Brainiac is so sadistic in this world. And then Brainiac continues on. He's like, "As I was saying, your mind, your secrets, your everything, all you are belongs to me now. Kal-El, I've read your brain. I've seen your memories. Every second of your sad little life. Such a tragedy what happened to Krypton. I can see why you think you want to save these poor humans from their self-destruction. but I have been here among them since 1938. So believe me when I say, once you let yourself kill a few million of the hapless sacks of entrails, you'll see. That's exactly the sort of help that these people deserve. So meanwhile here, we shift over to Lois and Jimmy, who are currently right now being held as prisoners. And I forgot to mention this here earlier because we haven't covered this series, I think, since like issue 4 here. But I forgot to mention that we found out earlier that Primus, who is the leader of the Omegas, you know, the rebel group that's been fighting against Lazarus here, that it actually is Talia. Or I should say Talia is Primus. So she comes in here and she starts beating Lois. And of course, Lois, being Lois, is kind of taunting her and telling her like, either you fight fair or you just kill us and get it over with, right? And honestly, what this really does is that it just serves as an opportunity to get Talia to talk and to find out like what their actual plan is, which is basically what Talia does, because she's like, nah, I won't be the one to kill you. So then Jimmy, he tries to reason with Talia by saying, he's like, yo, after everything that you've seen, all the atrocities that Lazarus Core has committed, how could you betray the Omega Men? To which Lois is like, don't you see, Jimmy? The Omega Men and Lazarus were always two sides of the same coin. It's all been a lie. To which, of course, Talia's like, the only truth in this world, little lamb, is that everything is a lie. All life is corrupted in its very atoms. Left untended, humanity will consume itself and everything it touches. All that stands between survival and apocalypse is the hand of the undying shepherd of man, my holy father, Ras Al Ghul. And basically, as Talia continues on, she declares basically that she'll help forge a new world out of the old, and that Superman will be the weapon to do it. So Lois, of course, pushes back and is like insisting that he's stronger than they know, and basically saying that it will never happen. But then Talia, she kind of just smirks and she's like, oh, believe me, I know him better than you ever will. The father box tells me everything. Now, as it pertains here to the father box, I've not talked about this yet either. Usually we hear about the mother box, right? Which we've seen with the New Gods in New Genesis. So basically here, the father box is a counterpart to that, right? And of course, with this being the absolute universe created by Darkseid, it would make sense that this would be here. But just like the mother box here, the father box is part machine and also a part conscious entity here, but it's tied to the dark, like this oppressive energy here of Apocalypse rather than the harmonious energy here of New Genesis that the mother box will be tied to. And the father box here is usually linked directly to the will of Darkseid, meaning that they're more controlling and sinister in terms of like their guidance, as opposed to, once again, like the mother box here, which is a little bit more compassionate, kind of built to protect and serve their user with a sense of like morality here. So it's not really surprising that like Ras Al Ghul, Talia, Lazarus, all these other quote unquote bad guys are so menacing and evil, right? Because they are, I say quote unquote bad guys, but yeah, they are bad guys, that they're so menacing and evil, right? And even to a certain extent, if you look at the good guys, they're kind of influenced in a dark way too, right? Which is the reason why I believe it was back in issue 8 or 9 here of the series where the father box was used to remove the kryptonite bullets here from Superman. Soul, who's Superman's suit, told him, like, you cannot allow that thing to get near you again, because if it does, that could influence him negatively. But the thing about it is that you'll kind of see like how that influence may have already taken shape here. So when we jump back to this, as Talia leaves, she says this, she's like, Superman has a breaking point, just like anyone. And once he's reached it, you will see for yourself, Miss Lane, for his final test will be to kill you both. So as we jump back here to day 5, well, the torture for Superman continues on. And the other Brainiacs here, one of them mentions it like in the last hour, or I should say here, Brainiac himself says in the last hour, the subject has experienced himself slaying 8,577 peacemakers. And Kal is screaming like, no! And then he starts saying, get out of my mind. And it's here where we begin to see him attack Brainiac directly, choking him out and shouting, no, not millions, just you, which is referring to what was said here earlier in the issue. And Superman is kind of staggering here, right? And kind of clutching his head at the same time as he like throws down Brainiac, and he's like, yo, no, like this is not who I am. And he pleads with Brainiac, or the other Brainiacs, I should say, here. He's like, he's telling them, he's like, they're prisoners just like him, and that they deserve liberty, and that together we can. But then once again, he starts to like clutch his head in this moment because he's feeling, I guess, overwhelmed from all of what's going on, right? And that is when we see where Brainiac's voice cuts through again and says end program. Because once again, this was all just a simulation in his mind. And he's really pissed off here because he's like, yo, he should have killed me without thinking. He's like, check the code. You idiots must have botched something. To which one of the Brainiacs is like, apologies, Brainiac, but we did everything according to your plan. You know what I mean? And he's like, check it again. And then Brainiac goes back over to Superman again and he's like, you're supposed to kill me, you moron. Do you hear me in there? I am the one with his knives in your brain, tearing you apart. What are you waiting for? Kill me. And it's here where we switch back over again, or not switch back over, but we fast forward here to day 12. And this is when Brainiac 5 comes over here and is like, I regret to inform you that the subject Superman has still not progressed past phase 4. So Brainiac is just beside himself. He's like, I'm surrounded by incompetence. But then he begins to notice something here. He's like, the soul crystals, they're glowing bright. He's like, what is this? Why are the soul crystals active? Their containment has been disabled. How exactly did this happen? And then that's when a whisper comes in here from one of the Brainiacs that says, we deserve liberty. And if you remember here, that was what Superman said in one of the simulations. So this is when kind of Brainiac's eyes kind of go wide a little bit here. And he was like, yo, who said that? Which one of you ungrateful traitors said that? Speak up or you will all be labeled refuse. Which of course is like a reference back to here where we saw the origin of Brainiac throughout this Absolute Superman series here. But in this moment here, all of them kind of like step forward and just like, I did it. No, I did it. No, I did it. And then Brainiac kind of snarls here a little bit here as he's like lifting up this weapon and he's like, I see one demerit for each of you. And then when we fast forward here to day 14, all we see is that Brainiac has destroyed every single one of the Brainiacs that were around him. And then he continues on with these words. He's like, somehow, inexplicably, subject Superman refuses to progress. And he mentions, he's like, he is currently experiencing hour 500 of watching helplessly as I chainsaw my way through the clones. But then Brainiac, he reveals here what he's discovered. As he was reviewing the security footage here, he realized that Superman hadn't just been suffering, that he'd been secretly communicating with the clones during the night. As he says here, he's like, speaking so superhumanly soft that their brains only register the sound on a subconscious level. And as he continues on, he's like, a man who rewrites hard wiring with his whispers and inspires rebellion in a pack of walking toasters. And even as he says it, you can see that there's like some sort of admiring in his tone in a way. He's like, it is a privilege to pillage the brain of a being such as this. And then finally, Brainiac vows, he's like, I know what you're thinking, but he will progress, as he turns over to like one of the Brainiac's heads that he has over there on the side. And he's like, I promise you, no matter who has to die. So then in this next moment here, we see where Lois's dad is now shown up here to the facility. And initially, you can kind of tell that they're like, yo, why are you here? You know? And because they have a lot of respect for him, because he used to be one of the generals here for the Peacemakers, they don't like fully suspect anything until like the detectors go off. And then he's like, yo, it's my prosthetics, you know? And then when he goes down to try to like adjust, you know, or pretend here to adjust his prosthetics or take them off or whatever, he's like, well, the thing is, a man will do anything for his family. And that's when he pulls out a gun and then proceeds to take out the rest of the Peacemakers there. So then in this next moment here, we see where Sam has now head over to the cell where Lois and Jimmy are. And when he gets there, the dialogue here is kind of funny. Because Lois is like, yes, sir, General Dad. And, and her dad is like, save it for when we're not about to die. And when Jimmy asks the question, he's like, is there a gun for me too? Like Sam is like, yo, please tell me that this talking matchstick here ain't the reason you got yourself locked up. To which Lois is like, nah, this guy, of course not, but he is coming with us. And in this next moment right here, this is where Sam's like, okay, human shield, got it. So Sam is trying to get them to book it out of there, right? And Lois is like, yo, hold on, Pops. There's someone else that we got to get out of here too. But that's when we cut to this other location again. We cut over to Kansas, and we know that once again, of course, that this has to be some sort of simulation in Superman's mind again, right? But we go over here to the Kent farmhouse, which is currently under siege right now by Lazarus's soldiers that are currently swarming it, right? And on the ground here, Jonathan Kent is trying to tell them like, yo, get your hands off of him. He's just a child. Speaking, of course, about Superman, right? But then he gets clocked right in the face by one of the peacemakers, I should say. So Supes is like, yo, stop it. Leave the Kents alone. They were only trying to help me. And we do get this familiar scene here where we saw like in Superman was kind of recanting the story before here, where we see Jonathan Kent saying, son, please. And then Martha was like, go. But then there's this additional dialogue, which I think is actually realistically what happened here. We just didn't get to see the continuation of it because we saw where it was said, Kal-el, what are you doing? You have to run. I think that to a certain extent that they did tell him to run. It didn't just say go, right? But either way, let's move on. That's where Superman's like, no, I don't need to run. And then he goes off again. So this continual retraining of the mind, right? This is a simulation here of him killing over and over and over again the peacemakers. But in this moment here, that's where we see Ras Al Ghul come over and he starts talking to Superman. And he's like, bravo, Superman. I knew that you could do it. You were sent here for a reason to save this planet. You can't do that without blood on your hands. You see that now, right? And he continues on. He's like, after everything that you've endured, you deserve this. You free yourself like this. You deserve liberty, my son. Now it's time to go. But then before he could even finish that sentence, this is when we see Superman. He dips right into Ras Al Ghul's body and then pulls out his heart. And in this next moment here, we see where somebody's reaching out to him and saying, Superman, the Omega Men are here to save you from Lazarus. Come with us. But then at the same time, he also essentially takes her out too. And I think that was Lois Lane. I don't think that was Talia at that moment. I could be wrong. But then here, as the simulation continues on, right, we see Jonathan and Martha asking the question like, yo, are you going to kill her? And like, yo, you're so angry, son. I know. It's going to be all right. Just listen to us now. But it's in that moment here where the simulation gets interrupted because Lois comes in and then she shoots Brainiac in the back. And as she's like restraining Brainiac down, he just tells her, he's like, you're too late, Lane. And as Jimmy goes over, he's like, yo, Superman, how do we get him out of this? And he mentions how these things are in his head. We can't just like pull him out of it, right? To which Lois was like, yeah, we ain't really got a choice. But it kind of looks like it's too late here because Primus has now caught up with him. Talia is now caught up with him because it's in this moment here where Sam is like, yo, I can't feel my legs. And then we see a knife right through his skull. I'm like, woof. So as Lois right here, she runs over to her dad. Jimmy is still trying to get Supes up. And then Brainiac, he pops up and he's like, no, he's mine. Take your hands off Superman. And Jimmy just like cold clocks him. And then starts to yell at Superman like, Kal-el, wake up. So then after Jimmy says that here, we go back to the simulation here in Superman's head. And this is kind of where you start to see the darkness in a way kind of unravel here in Superman. But it also provides some sort of closure, but it's not necessarily great either, right? So let's continue on. So this is where Jonathan says, he's like, Cal, this never should have happened. None of this. And Martha says, she's like, we should have been together. Lazarus took that from us. They took you. And Jonathan continues on. He's like, we were wrong to tell you to run. There's no safe place for you anywhere, son. Not unless you fight for it. But then Soup says this. He's like, I've been trying, but everyone keeps telling me who I'm supposed to be and no one listens to. But that's when Jonathan cuts him off and he's like, we know, Kal-el. We see you. And Martha's like, we see it all. So believe us when we tell you. We're so proud of you and what you've done. Just keep doing it, son. Get out there and kill them all. And what this is basically the final straw here, really, in Brainiac's simulation and his plan. And as we jump back here to the present time, we see Kal-el here as he roars and then he breaks out of those kryptonite restraints. And as he jumps out here and he attacks Brainiac, we see one of the Brainiacs say, save him. Save Superman as he releases his soul here out of the containment. And as Lois makes a promise here to Talia to say, like, for killing my pops, I will kill you for this. Superman goes on his rampage as he picks up Brainiac by the neck. And Brainiac is kind of taunting him. He's like, yo, where do you think you are? And as he squeezes ever so tighter, that's where Soul begins to come back online and starts talking to Superman. And Soul says, he's like, Kal-el, this is Soul. I have been reactivated. I'm getting us out of here. But the thing is, Kal-el is not responding back to him at all. And in this next moment here, all we see is a massive explosion as Soul asks the question, Kal-el. So I don't know, like, I don't know where Superman goes from this. Like, I feel like this is the straw that's finally broken the camel's back. You know what I mean? Like, oh. So what do you guys think? Let me know. Leave it down below in the comments here. Don't forget to leave a like on this video here for the YouTube algorithm. Also, subscribe if you're brand new to the channel. Check out our links that are down below in the description, where you can follow us on social media, where you can also join us here on Patreon. We appreciate you watching. And as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic. Bye.